So, an enormously successful group of animals. Why is that? Well, because they're the only group of mammals that can properly fly. We have other animals that have the pretext of flying, things like flying squirrels, but that's not true. They don't fly, they glide. So they basically transform vertical height into horizontal distance by simply gliding. But bats are phenomenal flying machines. In many ways, they're better at flying than birds. In terms of their maneuverability and their efficiency, they're better than many birds. They're not built for long-distance flights. So we don't see bats migrating from one side of the world to another. There are migratory species, but they don't fly the sorts of distances that birds do. But they are extremely able animals. They are also very important in our ecosystems. They are feeding on insects, and insects are the fundamental part of our food chain. So if we look at bat populations, we look at their distributions, we look at their numbers, it can tell us easily about the health of the broader environment. And we use them, therefore, as indicator species. So we're very keen to monitor the health of our bat populations, not just in the UK, but in many other parts of the world too. They have an economic value because they're eating insects. And in some parts of the world where bats occur in huge numbers, in some of the caves in America and Mexico, Mexican free-tailed bats are occurring in roosts of millions of animals. And when you get millions of a relatively large-sized bat flying out every night, consuming, therefore, billions of insects, then that can have a beneficial effect on farming. And we think, for instance, that the Mexican free-tailed bats, which are active in the southern United States, feed on a type of migratory moth called the cotton boll moth. And the larvae of the cotton boll moth are a terrible pest in cotton plantations, of which there were a great number, and there are still some remaining. And therefore, the activities of these bats are worth millions of pounds to the agricultural economy of the United States, because they're going out and eating things. Do bats have a downside? I can't think of one, to be honest with you. Some people will say that the downside is that they can transmit dangerous diseases. And one disease that we might be aware of here in the UK and Europe, although it's not typically present in the UK, is rabies. And rabies is one of the world's most dangerous diseases. If you're not inoculated against rabies and you're bitten by a rabid animal, you will die. That's it. There is no ambiguity about it. There is only one survivor in the world, a woman in America, who hasn't survived intact. So rabies is a very dangerous disease. Again, it generates mistrust. What is the problem? Most people go through life, you're unlikely to bump into a bat and get bitten and therefore get rabies. Well, I'm afraid to say that bats are sometimes tasty and people eat them. And particularly in the Far East, throughout Malaysia and Indonesia, bats are on the menu. That sounds absurd, given that the size of our British bats, the biggest one's about this big, and it weighs probably about the same amount, well, less than a vole. And, snacking on voles is not the most optimal way to make a meal for ourselves. But, of course, we're looking at other animals. Some of the larger bats are weighing more than a kilogram. And in areas where meat is at a premium and bats roost together in very large numbers, you can go there, kill any number of bats, you get yourself a meal. So they are a commodity which is eaten. And that's where the risk of disease transmission comes in. But in the UK, we're generally safe. But to learn more about bats, let's look at some living bats. In the UK, we have a fabulous charity called the Bat Conservation Trust. And the Bat Conservation Trust does everything it can to disseminate positive information about the bats, to initiate surveys so that we can learn more about our bat population, which basically up until recently has been very difficult to monitor, because without contemporary technology, counting bats, identifying bats in the field has been very, very difficult. Things have changed recently. But the BCT are on the case. And the BCT kind of oversees, but in a gentle way, a whole group of, a collection of bat groups around the country. And each of the bat groups are staffed by dedicated volunteers. One's just taken to the stage here. And they are people who have an intrinsic affinity for these animals and a great capacity to look after them. And one thing I have to say before we start is that they are specially licensed to handle the bats, because all species of bats in the UK are protected by law, and you're not allowed to pick them up or handle them unless you are James Simpson. This evening. James, welcome. I'll ask you not to applaud until we finish the bats because we don't want to startle them. So if we just twist round, and we've got a camera here which should be able to show us on screen so that you can see this small bat. What have we got, James?
We've got a very lively common pipistrelle bat who's probably going to jump onto the floor any moment. This is actually an injured bat that has had surgery to repair its broken fingers by one of our dedicated vets who does it in his own time. And we don't know their age. We can only, when we get them in, we don't know whether they're adult or juvenile. We can only tell if they're adult or juvenile. And this one came in as an adult. She could be anything up to about 20 odd years old, which most people are surprised by. She weighs the same as just over the weight of a 20p piece.
And these are Britain's commonest bat, aren't they? So if people see a bat, particularly if they see one emerging from their home in the summer, from a summer maternity roost, it's likely to be one of these.
It is, yes. They like houses, they roost in houses, they have their summer roosts where the females have the babies, normally between the tiles and the roofing felt, or they're in the cavity walls. They like bungalows, houses, not really fussy. The maternity roosts for the commons are normally less than 100. The maternity roosts for the sopranos, which is another species of pipistrelle, can be up to 500 or 600. And that's just females, because the boys aren't allowed there. The adult males don't use the maternity roosts.
And what about feeding? Because we can see this is a very small animal. It weighs as much as a 20p piece.
She's okay. She's doing okay.
They're feeding on extremely small insects.
Yes, they're feeding on very, very, very small. A lot of the species of tiny little midges are the non-biting midges, and they estimate that they eat a minimum of have to survive by eating at least 2,000 a night. They have a very high metabolic rate. They while they're flying, they're such a very, very strong, complex animal that while they're flying, they're using up tremendous amounts of energy. So as soon as they do land, they go into a sort of cool-down mode where they let their body temperature drop, their heart rate drop, so they can conserve energy until they next have to feed.
And of course, during the wintertime, they're famed for being one of the few mammal species that we have in the UK, or groups of animals, that truly hibernate.
They have the ability to go into torpor. What they'll do is, so long as they'll fatten up at the end of the year, if they can get enough food, they will then go into torpor, which involves them staying. There you go.
Switching bats.
Switch bats, see if this one's a bit calmer.
Okay, that's good.
That's Bramley.
Okay, there we are.
Thank you.
Just chill out a bit, Bramley, so that we can see you clearly. So yes, we were saying, they leave the maternity roost, they fatten up in autumn, they visit any number of other potentially useful winter roosts, and they eventually settle down and go into a torpor where their heart rate drops, they're consuming that fat at a minimal rate.
Yes, they like places that are very, very constant low temperature. They like places where the humidity is very high, so they don't have to go off and drink during the winter. And he's telling us off now.
Let's just turn this on. So we've got something here, which
that's the echolocation of him. He's plotting out and looking around the room. This bat can't fly, but he could easily jump off.
So what's happening here is a very high frequency sound is being transformed into a sound that we can hear. That's what this bat detector is doing. So the sound that it's making now, that series of clicks, are being spat out into the environment. They're hitting all of these people in the front row, squarely between the eyes, and they're bouncing back to the bat that has extraordinarily sensitive ears and a remarkable brain. And it can transform this sound to produce, now I'm going to use a word which is probably inappropriate, an image of its environment. We don't know how bats see with sound, but they clearly are able to generate a means, whether it's a visual means, we don't know, but an understanding of their environment. And that clicking sound is different for each species of bat. So the bat detector is able, using one of these and a bit of practice, well, some degree of practice, you're able to identify through the sound that the bat's making, the context, which sort of bat, where it is, if you see it, how big it is and how it's flying, you pretty much get it down to species level, with a degree of confidence.
Yes, there's several different systems that are used, and you can spend as much money as you like, but the reality of it is that the ones that most members of the public have using this system, you set it at a certain frequency, and you'll tend to get a certain species of bat within that frequency. The thing that you have to be amazed about these animals is the fact that the females mate in the autumn. They don't become pregnant in the autumn. They only become pregnant in the spring if their body allows them to, because they've stored enough fat to overwinter and come out of torpor fit and healthy enough to have a baby. Then they have the baby in May or June, and that baby they then have to suckle for 5 weeks. And within 5 to 6 weeks, that baby has to learn to fly, learn to hunt, the whole lot in 5 weeks from the day it's born, which is quite a colossal and amazing animal.
Okay, what do we got here?
So now we come on to a slightly different species. The bats you just saw were pipistrelles. They're what we call a two-finger bat. They're our smallest species. This is a medium-sized bat. This is a slightly different species. This is called a brown long-eared bat. They're gleaning bats. They can lift insects off of things. She's an adult. She's at least 2 years old.
Turn around so that the camera can get a view there of just of her face on. If you come back a little bit like that.
Certainly.
And what about that? And you can see there, we spoke about the echolocation, and this bat, as you mentioned, is a gleaning bat. So this one is hovering around trees, listening to principally beetles and moths that have landed on the leaves, and then it's extremely adept when it comes to flying. It can fly backwards, hover on the spot, and it will move forward and pick the insects off of the leaves. Rather than catching them in flight, it's taking them off of the leaves. And it's got these extraordinary ears. I mean, just look at that. And these are, again, incredibly important when it comes to pinpointing with accuracy where its prey is. Now, one of the misconceptions that we have about bats, and it's an expression that my mother used frequently, and I dare say that some of you in here have used it as well, is as blind as a bat. Now, people presumed that bats were blind when they found their corpses, I presume, in days of old, because their eyes are extraordinarily small. And if you catch them there where they catch the light, you'll see that they do have, relative to the size of their body, and a nocturnal animal, and most nocturnal animals have large eyes, they do have small eyes. But I've got to tell you that no bats are blind at all. And in fact, their vision is extremely acute at night. And in many species, it's incredibly important. So whilst they're echolocating, there are limitations as to how far you can throw a sound click into the environment and it bounce back to you to develop accurately an image of that environment. And there are therefore species that are dependent on their vision to see beyond where they can hear. So all bats have pretty good vision, certainly better vision than we have at night, with the exception of this one though, James, because this is for once a blind bat.
Not actually this one, no. Two of the others we have.
Oh, it's not this one.
This one isn't actually blind, but the thing you have to understand, these, compared with other bats, do have quite large eyes, but that these are in one of their key prey is a moth called the yellow underwing moth, and over millions of years there's an arms race running between the two animals, and that's why her ears have got bigger and bigger, and her ability to echolocate has got softer and softer and softer. She hardly echolocates at all, because as soon as the yellow underwings, which is a nice big meal that she wants to eat, hears the sound of an echolocating bat, it drops to the floor and hides. So if she doesn't echolocate and she just hunts them down by hearing them, they don't get the chance to do so. And so she's going to have a jump off.
Okay.
It's okay, it's all right. She's done very well. We do let them have activity. Although she's got an injured wing and she's had 3 of her fingers removed by the vet, she does want to fly, and she's never come to terms with the fact that she's a bat and that she can't fly anymore. She's always going to want to fly. So that's...
But you mentioned that arms race, so what's happened here is that the moth has evolved the ability to specifically hear the echolocation clicks of the bats. And when we see film of them in flight, as soon as the moth hears them, it just falls out of the sky, and therefore it's much more difficult for the bat to catch it. And it's this that's led to, as James said, this evolutionary arms race between the two species. And this is something we see between predator and prey constantly, but here we see it very obviously and visually with these ears. But before she gets completely fed up, although she's very calm at the moment.
She's calmed down. She's had a fly.
She's had a little fly.
She's remembered she can't.
Let's address a couple of things. Well, it looks like the ears might be going down a bit as well. Let's address a couple of things. Firstly, you've got the bats in captivity, and these are injured bats that can't go back to the wild.
Yes.
You're specially licensed.
Yes.
You know exactly what you're doing. This is not a game for amateurs.
Nope.
But the critical role that they play, and as they are at the moment, is as ambassadors for their kind and their species.
You would never see one of these bats if it was not for these type of events, because these bats, healthy bats of this species, are only ever found in people's lofts occasionally when they're torpid, because when they're out and about flying, they avoid noise, light, and humans. So you'd never see one of these out and about at night. Unlike the pips, which come out a lot earlier, and you see at dusk, or seem to see at dusk, and they fly quite close to you because they want the little midges that were around you, because you're giving off carbon dioxide, which is attracting midges to you, and they're coming to eat the midges that were around you. They're not trying to get tangled up in your hair, they're trying to get some dinner.
Let's speak about bats generally in the UK. We think, although we haven't monitored all of their populations well for long enough, that many of those populations are in quite critical decline because of a lack of insects.
Well, we're pretty certain, because of work done by even the Environment Agency, that the tonnage of insects has declined by different people saying between 60 and 80% in the last 30 to 40 years, which basically means they're not getting the food they need. When they have young, the young aren't getting to maturity, and they're taking longer to grow up, and they're running out of year, so that they're not able to get enough weight on to survive the winter. So they are being gradually dying off. There's no other word for it. In certain areas where there is still enough food for them, they will still hang on, and that'll be the last place they go from. But certain parts of the country, they're in serious decline already. And again, frequently asked questions: what should people do if they find a bat, if it flies into their house, or they pick one up? If you find a bat in the day, the bat is in trouble. It won't get better and fly off that night. It's on the ground because it's run out of life. It needs to be put into a secure container carefully. Use a tissue or something so you don't handle it. It reduces the stress on the bat, and it reduces the chance of it trying to bite you because it thinks you're going to eat it. Give a smallest dish of water. Make sure the box is secure, but it's got some air holes in it. Look on the internet, find any of the helplines for bat conservation organisations like the BCT or the regional ones. They will get a volunteer, someone who's unpaid like us, who will come out and collect the bat and do what we can to work out whether it's so badly injured it needs to be put to sleep. Because if we don't do that, it will could take up to a week or two to die, because it will just wake up with a broken limb, go back to sleep again, and hope the next day when it wakes up it feels a bit better. And it will keep doing that until it dies. The other options are that it could have surgery and it could be used for education like this one. And the gold standard is that we fatten it up, use the right foods for it, test its flying, build its flying up, and then release it back into the wild. The two of us this year, we've managed this year to deal with 83 bats this year, of which 79 of them were live, and the others we were called out to were already dead. But of those, 31 of them we've been able to put back into the wild, back as wild animals. That's what we're striving to do. Miss Piggy is a casualty, but her role here is something that you'd never otherwise see, and we hope you like seeing her.
Okay. And Julie, tell us a bit about the bat group. You're kneeling there in anticipation of another flight. And almost had one. Yes. But tell us briefly about your bat group and the other work that it does, apart from rehabilitation.
Okay, we do a lot of survey work. I'm just keeping my eye on her as well. We do a lot of survey work, public education work.
Okay, you can stand up now because the bat's gone. Come into the light, okay. albeit red.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do lots of survey work, public education work. We have to keep the records for the county's bat sightings and loads of stuff, basically. And we need members. If we don't have members, the work doesn't get done. So we do a lot of training for people as well. We all join the bat group as beginners, and we learn from other people in the bat group. And through that, we managed to train a lot of people to be able to do bat work, like James and I, and other things like the survey work out in the field. But it also means that all the voluntary work, the monitoring, gets done. It doesn't get done if there aren't volunteers to do it.
This is a very long-winded way of saying we need volunteers. And they could be here this evening because obviously people have turned up because they are interested in seeing bats as well as owls. How would they contact you?
You can go onto the website and just contact us, and somebody will get back to you, and you can join the bat group by downloading the form and sending off a £5. It's really expensive to join the bat group. It costs a £5 a year for the whole household. And that means that you can come along and do survey work such as hibernation surveys, which no ordinary member of the public is allowed to because you need a licensed person to lead the survey. Bat box checks where you get to see live bats as well. Field surveys in the summer and the spring. Loads of stuff.
You get to meet bats. You get to learn about bats. You get to meet people who know more about bats than you do. And for a £5. Come on. It's absolutely fantastic. And the bats are away. Can I ask for a round of applause for Julie and James? Thank you. Not just for being kind enough to bring the bats along so that we could all see them and learn about them this evening, but also for all the other extraordinary work they do. 80 bats a year, and nearly half of those are going back to the wild. These are tiny, fragile, highly specialised animals when it comes to their care. These people have extraordinary and unique skills, and they deserve a better round of applause than that half-hearted one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. They are extraordinary animals, as we've already said. One of the few things that I can tell you, a few more bat facts to take away, if you like, is that their wing membranes, which look incredibly fragile, are very thin, but they're actually remarkably strong. If they do get torn, and they do, bats have accidents, they fly into things, occasionally they might fight and tear those wing membranes, they heal incredibly quickly. So if they get a little hole in, within just a few days, that hole heals up. And they are extraordinarily sensitive because they have on their surface tiny cells called Merkel cells. Now, we have Merkel cells in our fingertips. And you know how sensitive our fingertips are. Well, they have these across what we call the patagium, which is that membrane stretched between the fingers. And the difference is that in bats, each of the Merkel cells has a little hair sticking out of it so that they can detect air movement. So the whole time the bat is flying, it's monitoring over the surface of its wings the movement of the air, and it can decide, therefore, exactly how to fly in terms of speed and process and, critically, efficiency. So they are although they're just, appear to be like skin stretched between those elongated fingers, they're extremely sensitive. And because they are very thin and filled with blood vessels, a remarkable thing about the bat's patagium, that skin, is that it's also used for gaseous exchange. Now, all of our gaseous exchange is done through our lungs. We breathe in, we take the air into our lungs, we remove the oxygen, and then we expel the CO2. But as James was saying, these animals have extraordinarily high metabolic rates. They're feeding principally on protein, insects. They're flying really fast. The fastest bats in level flight can fly at 99 miles an hour in level flight. So they're very fast moving. That requires an enormous amount of energy. In order to generate that energy, we all know that you need oxygen. So they actually use their wings as a form of lung. And they have oxygen exchange. They get oxygen into their wings and into their bloodstream there, and they expel carbon dioxide through their wings. They are truly, truly remarkable animals, bats, beautiful things. Should we move on to owls? I'm just checking the time here. Yes, we better move on to owls. I've got a glove here. I'll tell you what, it's not for the old barn owl. I'll just go without. Okay, I'm sorry. I've got it. Okay, here we are. So, one of the most popular animals in contemporary times. This is a barn owl. Basically, across the world, I mentioned earlier, we have about 225 different species of owl. The dispute is amongst taxonomists who want to subdivide some species and expand others. The barn owl, as a group, are amongst the most successful animals on the planet. So we see owls that look pretty much like this in terms of their body design, even their coloration, all across the Americas, all across Asia and Africa, and in Australasia. They occur in every continent, even on tiny Pacific islands. They have their groups of barn owls. The only place we don't get them is in Antarctica. So a highly successful animal, given the opportunity. In the UK, they're very much a species, again, like our bats, which we monitor closely as a means of assessing how healthy our countryside is. Because in the last century, our barn owl population probably declined by about 90% from the turn of the century. It's stabilised now, and it's stabilised for a couple of reasons, one of which is a human intervention. They were running out of nesting sites. They're called barn owls because when we started building barns, they moved in. They typically would have nested in caves and on cliffs and hollow trees. But the minute we got the habit of erecting buildings, they moved in. And then, obviously, we started to tear down those old buildings, and contemporary agricultural architecture doesn't come with nooks and crannies, and they were running out of nesting spaces. So from about the 70s onwards, there was a major drive to erect barn owl nesting boxes. And initially, I remember putting up a few in the 70s, and we just used to put up tea crates, which were available at that time, and the owls would use them. These days, you can get far more, beautiful des res, grand designs for barn owls, and which are far better for the owls. And they cost about, 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds, and you can get them off the internet, and you can put them up, and they work. 50% of all of these birds that are nesting in the UK are now nesting in man-made boxes that have been put up specifically for them by farmers and ornithologists and enthusiasts. So that's good. And it sort of stabilised their population. They're still declining by about 3% a year, but compared to a lot of other things, I hate to say it, that's pretty good. And they can have bumper years. This is an animal that responds very rapidly to increases in its prey, and it's principally designed to feed on small mammals. Short-tailed field voles being the principal food. And these voles go through population cycles. And when they reach the peak of their cycle, the owls respond by laying more eggs, rearing more young, and sometimes breeding 2 or 3 times in the course of a year. And they will breed, therefore, in every month of the year. I've seen baby barn owls in the nest on Christmas Day. And a couple of years ago, someone sent in a picture to Springwatch of a nest where barn owls had laid and reared 10 young in one nest, in one clutch. So there's so much food about at this time that they're able to bounce back. They get hit by hard winters, of course, because if you're trying to catch small mammals and the small mammals are active beneath the snow, then as a barn owl you can't get through it. I'll tell you briefly about their senses. Basically, they've got remarkable eyes, and they've got very large eyes. And if we were to pluck the head of this bird and dissect its skull, and that's what it thought about that idea, we would see that the eyes are so big that they can't move in their sockets. And that's why we see both of the eyes facing forward. They have and need very good stereoscopic vision. And that means that they're able to judge distances extremely well. And that's why they've got these forward-facing eyes. The eyes are also relatively large for the bird. And the reason for that is that they're active at night. The more light you let in, the better the image you can generate. And they have a whole different arrangement of organising the cells in their eyes from ours, which allow them to develop more sensitivity. But I've got to just point something obvious out to you, and that is that eyes don't actually see things. Eyes merely collect the information and transfer it to the brain. It's the brain that generates the image. Nothing comes out of the back of our eyes or the owl eyes in the form of a picture. It's our brain that produces that image. And the key difference between our nocturnal vision and the owl's nocturnal vision is not actually the cellular structure of the eye, although it's greatly enhanced in the owl. It's actually the way that the brain is organised. And they have a system of neurons in their brain which allow them to separate and build an image at night with a far greater degree of sensitivity than our brains have. So it's a brain thing, their vision. However, having said that, it's their ears which are their most important sense. And you see this facial disc on the front of the bird here. Well, that facial disc is the gristly bits of our ear. That's designed to capture the sound and channel it into the ear. Now, when I was at school, there was a bloke called Marcus in 4G, and Marcus could move his ears. Initially, the girls thought this was interesting. By the time he was a teenager, it didn't add to his sex appeal. However, we can't typically move our ears. We have no need to, because we can move ourselves. We can walk from one place to another to map the precise location. But the owl can actually move those feathers on its face so that it can channel very precisely any sounds down into its ears. And in the owl, one of the ears is up here, and the other ear is down here. So they've got asymmetrical ears. They couldn't wear glasses. Well, they could, but they'd be skewy. And the reason for that is that they want to be able to pinpoint sound without moving. Because if you're a predator, you don't want to move, because you're going to get spotted moving. So you want to be able to pinpoint the sound without moving. So it's got stereoscopic eyes and binaural hearing. And what the owl does when it hears something is it twists its head until the sound reaching each ear, the sound reaches each ear at exactly the same time. And so if it hears a little rustle, it will twist its head like that, point its beak at the sound, and when the sound is reaching both ears at the same time, it knows that's where the direction of the sound is coming from, and it can do that without moving from one place to another. Now, the difference between this ear and this ear is 30 millionths of a second in terms of the time it takes the sound to reach there. 30 millionths of a second. That's how attuned they are. And they're also attuned to listen to sounds that are being produced in high frequencies that we can't hear, the communication sounds that small mammals use. So they are listening for these, and they fly about, and then once they hear the animal, then they spot it with their eyes, and then they fly down and do the killing with their talons. So the beak here, I'm not worried about getting injured by this beak, because it's not terribly strong. They will tear up their food with it, but invariably they like to swallow their prey as whole or in one or two pieces. and they really only tear it up to feed it to their young. So the beak's not very powerful. It's the talons here that do all of the damage. 4 on each foot, and obviously if they capture a small mammal, they just sink those talons into it. So you've got 8 large daggers being stabbed into you. And if you're a vole or a mouse, that's terminal, really. So highly efficient hunters, but there is one more thing, and we're going to demonstrate this now. Derek Tyndall has come along. He's bought the birds this evening, and Derek and I are going to show you an owl in action, and it will demonstrate a very important part of its physiology. So, Derek, what's your degree of confidence this evening for a successful owl flight?
Out of 10, probably 2.
Really?
No, really good. Yeah, he'll be fine. She'll be fine.
Yeah?
No problem at all.
Okay. Right.
We'll just keep the food away for the moment.
How far do you think she go? Are you going to go? Are you going to be going out into the audience here?
I think I'm going to go onto that level piece there.
Okay.
And then we'll see how we go from there.
All right. Right, you take that food. Don't look at that at the moment. Right.
You can either use mine or there's another tub there. So
Okay.
I'm just going to have a walk over there.
Okay.
Yeah, she's okay.
All right, you're sounding keen. Yeah, it's all right bragging about it. We want to see you in action in a moment. Okay. Right. Okay.
Okay, Lily. Here.
So that was 2, Derek, yeah?
Whatever you said to her didn't work. Lily!
Okay, now, just one thing. If everyone sits still, if she flies towards you, just let her land on you. Don't try and brush her off. She may land on your head if you're particularly privileged.
She'll probably come back down here. Lily, come on then. Here.
Okay. Now the next time that she takes to the air, what I need you to do is to everyone be quiet and just listen to the owl flying.
Lily.
There's nothing to hear. The owl's flight is completely silent. Now, we are not entirely sure how owls... Should we give it another go, do it? I mean, the confidence is up now, surely.
Yeah, we'll have another go, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll take it, and then
yeah,
okay.
No problem.
So basically, we're not entirely sure how they do it, but we know that their body is covered in very soft feathers, which are likely to break up the airflow. We know also that the leading edges of their feathers here have a comb on them, which also changes the airflow. It doesn't make them terribly aerodynamic, but it does mean that they can fly quietly. Oh, this is a bit small. Okay. What's her name?
Lily.
Lily. Come on, Lily.
Lily.
That's probably because I haven't got a glove. There you go. And also, the surface of the feathers here is very, very velvety. Now, the downside for Lily is that this means that the feathers aren't waterproof. She can't use a preen gland, as most birds would, to oil her feathers and keep them waterproof. And if you're a hunting owl, not being able to go out in the rain can be problematic. Looks like I've got a friend, Derek.
I'll come and watch.
Can be problematic because you can't hunt. And if you are hunting for your young, that means that they're going to go hungry. So prolonged periods of heavy rain are really bad news for barn owls, particularly in the breeding season. Lily, come on, over there, look. Oh, over there.
Lily.
There's Derek, there, look.
Lily.
Use your exceptional eyesight.
That's a good girl.
There we are. Right.
There we go.
Derek, do you want to, maybe we could go further up. Are you feeling, how's your confidence now? Building, surely.
Yeah, I'll go a bit further up, yeah?
You go a bit further up, I'll call her back down here, and then maybe you can swap sides and everyone can get a flyover. Right. Lily, come on. Come on.
Lily down there.
Lily.
No.
Lily,
Yes.
here we are. Oh. Did someone get lucky there?
It was either food or something else.
I think something was ejected from the owl. Come on. Come on, Lily. Come on, Lily. Come on. And owls have a reputation for being wise. But I've got to tell you, they're not very wise. It's difficult to contrast human intelligence with other animals' intelligence, but the smartest of all the birds are the crows and the ravens. And they say that the most stupid are turkeys, but I think that's possibly simply because of Christmas. There we are. So let's try her across this way, Derek. But no, they're not terribly bright, the owl. Come on then. Come on, here we are. No, that's my finger. Okay. Okay.
Lily?
Couple more goes.
Yeah, I'm out of food now, but yeah.
Okay. So, as you can hear, the flight is entirely silent, and therefore the bird doesn't need to fly very fast. So as a predatory bird, it wants to actually fly as slowly as possible. And that's why we see barn owls quartering backwards and forwards across the grass. When they're hunting over a meadow, they flutter from side to side so they can hover, not for long, but for long enough. They don't need to fly fast because their prey never hears them coming. It's taking it entirely by surprise. So they're not a fast-moving raptor. And very often, what they'll do is just... Come on. Come on, one more go. Oh, one more go is always the worst, isn't it? Come on. Come on. There we are. Perfect. Okay. Okay, no, that's me. And that's a little bit of chick. We don't want to leave that on stage, do we? Ah. There we are. Okay. Perfecto. So, Derek, tell us a bit about Lily.
Yeah.
As an individual owl. What's her personality like?
It's really good to be...
Oh, it was. Well, we can leave her there for a moment, can't we? She'll come back, I'm confident. So, where did she come from? Is she a rescue as well?
Yeah, she's a rescued bird. She came from... wasn't a bad rescue, it was a good one. I think it's captive bred, so it can't go back to the wild again. It can't go back to the wild, rather. It's illegal to take wild birds of prey and train them up. So this was captive bred. It was still a rescue. I think the lady or gentleman got tired of her, and then we got her. And she'd been looked after really, really well, which is nice. And then we started to fly her, and she's now one of our flying display teams now. Yes, she flies quite well. She's flown well here this evening as well. And she's 15 years old now.
15?
15. So I think she'll be, I think she's actually 16 now, 16 years old.
Yeah.
So hopefully...
That's pretty good, isn't it? I mean,
it's not bad for captive bred, you know. So I think some say that they could go to about 20 years, some say 15. But she's fed on the best possible diet, and she gets a lot of exercise as well, even this time of the year.
We should say as well that they don't make great pets. So these are not an animal to keep or aspire to keep, as you might a cat or a dog. They're, again, rather like the bats. They're highly specialised in terms of their requirements.
Yeah.
You need licences to keep them, or they must be captive bred, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
We don't want to see them in pets at home or on the internet.
No, I mean, we get asked quite frequently, I would like a pet. In fact, we go around some schools to say dog versus owl. It's not a pet, the dog's a pet, but an owl isn't a pet. A lot of people want to have one in the garden, but as you've just seen, they don't always do as they should do, but you have to allow for that, You have to imprint these guys right from birth, so they sort of grow up and they know who mum or dad is. This one has obviously been imprinted, but no, they're certainly not a pet, and we fly these as regularly as we can.
Okay, if you want to put her back on, I'll talk about another owl.
Yeah,
and then we could think about
that's fine.
Something else. Just while we do that, can you bring the camera over? The thing about owls, I mentioned that they swallowed their prey whole, or pretty much in big chunks, and this is a real asset to scientists, or even young scientists, because they separate the indigestible bits of their food from the meat in an organ called the crop, which is at the top of the stomach. And so they then ingest a pellet, and you can see the pellets here. So this is a mass of indigestible material. It's made up of the bones, the fur, the feathers. Many species of bird do this, not just owls and other raptors, even blackbirds in your garden, which are eating earthworms. Where earthworms are invariably full of soil. They don't want to pass the soil through their gut, so they separate it in their crop, and then they cough up a pellet made of dirt. And kingfishers will cough up pellets made of fish bones. Doesn't matter what they're eating. Seagulls will cough up pellets made of all sorts of unspeakable things that they find at dumps. But the benefit is that if you recover the pellets, which you can from wherever the bird is, typically where the bird's roosting, then you can break them apart and see what's inside. Now, for species that tear their prey to pieces, that's sometimes problematic because they've destroyed all of the bones, and you then have to turn to the microscope to see what they've been eating. But for animals like owls, which swallow them in big chunks, very often the skulls or the principal bones of the animals that they've consumed are still whole. And when I was a kid, every Saturday we would go out and we would collect pellets like this, and we'd take them home. I'd sit down to watch Multicoloured Swap Shop, and my mum would bring in the donuts, and we would break open the pellets to see what was inside, and to try and identify all of the species that the barn owls, it was, that had been eating. And you can see here that this pellet is full of fur. So the first thing is we'd know very obviously that this is has been eating a small mammal. And there's the tail of a small mammal by the looks of it there. If you find the skull, I'm struggling to find the skull at the moment. If you find the skull, then you can identify it to species level with about 5 minutes practice, because the teeth are very distinctive if it's a vole or if it's a mouse. Let's have a quick look in this one. Well, here's one of the larger bones there. No skull. Blimey. Right, let's have a quick look in this. Hold on, where's my pot? Right, okay. You see, I'm of a mind that says that these sorts of things ought to be free in cereal packets. So that young people over breakfast can open the cornflakes and break open a little plastic tub, and inside they get their very own owl pellet, and then they could open it, and on the back of the cornflakes packet there will be a guide to identifying the skulls. I'm not going to take that idea to the Dragon's Den, but oh, here we are. I've got a jawbone at last. Something. Here we are. Right. Okay. So I'll put that in my hand. You should be able to see that quite clearly. So this is the lower jaw of a rodent of some kind. You can see that this is the incisor tooth here. This is where the jaw's articulated. And if I turn it round like this, so you're looking down on it, I'll just give it a little clean. You can look down on the top there, and you can see those teeth. And the patterns of the cusps on those teeth there tell me that this is either a mouse or a rat. It's certainly not a vole. They have a zigzag pattern on their molars, which is distinctive, whereas these cusps, these little points, much more like our molars, are distinctive of rats and mice. Now, if there's a mouse out in the UK countryside with jaws this big, I'm not going to walk home this evening. So I therefore know by a simple process of deduction that this is from a rat, and I imagine that this is a rat that you fed one of your owls, actually. So a domestic rat that's been fed. But I analysed my owl pellets. Got that one now. That's a beauty, isn't it? Really. I analysed the owl pellets for about 3.5 years, and I did graphs of all the relative abundances of the mice and the voles and the shrews, and on a couple of very exciting occasions, I found a dormouse skull, which was absolutely brilliant, and I was doing this with my biology teacher, and I thought, well, that's one up for me. And then the following week, he found a bat skull, and I'd been trumped by that. But it is something that young people can do, collect the pellets. So if you go out and find a roost, there's a very simple guide. I'm sure there's one online now that you can use to identify the skulls. Right. Okay. Got a runny nose. It must be an allergy I've developed to owl pellets. God forbid. Okay. Right, who have we got here then? I'll tell you what, you hang on to this one, because then you can tell us about it. So we've got a little owl. Tell us about the little owl.
Right, this is Pip, again a rescue, and one of the smaller...
So what, let's go over here, because then we can because she's small, we can get her on the camera, and she can be on the big screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Pip, little owl, the species little owl.
Hold her dead still, because you've given the cameraman a nightmare there. He's already had to deal with the fidgety bat. Last thing he needs is an owl on the move. Okay, there we are.
Yep, this is the little owl, the species little owl, and quite popular in the UK now. We have actually got some in the wild to where we live, not 10 minutes away from here. They do remind me a lot of the burrowing owl, the way of their habits and the way they move around, very animated. Steeped in history as well. I think it was Florence Nightingale actually had one of these. I'm not sure, but I think so. So there's always a lot about the owls, as you said earlier. There's very much in history. These guys will feed on insects and small mammals as well. Yeah,
and they were non-native species. They were brought in the 1800s. So typically there we are. I thought it was a dead bat for a moment, but thankfully they're all still alive. But they were brought in the 1800s and naturalised, as it were. And of course, many species that come to the that we've introduced, grey squirrels, American mink, Japanese knotweed. I mean, the list goes on. Yeah. They become invasive species and damage the ecology. These ones seem to have fitted in. Yeah. They've not pushed anything out, and they're feeding on insects and small mammals, but they do quite a lot of daytime feeding as well, don't they?
Yes, yeah. They're pretty much diurnal as well, aren't they? We've seen quite a few of them in the fields, sort of quartering it, looking for food. Even when we've been out flying larger raptors, you can see these in their little spinnies, looking for food.
And again, pretty small, but not the smallest owl in the world. The smallest owl in the world is a thing called an alph owl, and it weighs just 30 grams. And I hate to continue the illusion, but that's about the same amount as a vole. So, they are a tiny little bird. And then the largest owl that we have is the one over here, and this is a thing called the European eagle owl. And European eagle owls are the largest species. There are a couple of other fish owls which get pretty big as well. And they are, ferocious predators. And we're looking at an animal here that can, grow up to a big female. There's a sexual dimorphism. Females are invariably slightly bigger than the males. And they will get up to, in the region of, 4 kilograms. And so a massive female eagle owl, it's said that they can feed on fox cubs, baby roe deer. One thing's for sure, they exact a predatory pressure on plenty of other species of owl. They're hunting principally at night, and they will take other birds out of their nests, so they'll raid raptors' nests, things like peregrines and kites and buzzards at night. They'll also during the daytime predate the young, which they will take, and adults as well. So we're looking at a really big, powerful nocturnal predator. Tell us briefly about this one then, Derek.
Yeah, this is European eagle owl, a male, this one. Is weighing well over 4 pounds, capable of taking hare and rabbit as well. We don't hunt with this one, but I have actually seen some hunting around the world. In Israel, actually, I saw one hunting. We've got the prominent, the ear tufts, which aren't anything to do with ears, are
Nothing
they?
to do with ears. Yeah,
Nothing to do with
they're
ears.
called sorry. They're called plumicorn and plumicorns, and they're nothing to do with hearing at all. And they're there principally as display. Did you notice how they went down a little bit when I went towards the owl? So the owl will put them up and down, and they'll display mood with those, won't they? But I also read recently, I don't know what you think of this, Derek, I'm torn, but in some species where they're very well camouflaged, they think that the plumicorns sticking up are part of the camouflage to hide the owl in the daytime when it's trying to avoid the attention of smaller birds which are mobbing it. So our long-eared owl has that. Well, I don't know.
No, I'm not too sure either on that. But you said they've got their eyes apparently are nearly as big as ours, as a human's, but they do go far back into the brain, into the skull, I mean.
Massive. And again, we think that they have these brightly coloured orange eyes. It doesn't enhance their vision, obviously, but this is about communicating between, the sexes and between other owls. So this is a communication tool. When you look at the rest of the body, it's designed to be camouflaged. Camouflaged for two reasons. One, it wants to hide at night. If it's hunting, it helps not to be seen, although we've already said that they're silent hunters, catching by surprise. But critically in the daytime, if a bird like this is spotted by magpies or crows or jays or even squirrels, they will mob them. And they will mob them all day long. They won't give up. So as a consequence of that, the owl gets no sleep, it gets grouchy, it starts shouting at the kids, it burns the food, but they've got to rest. It's intrinsically important. So camouflage in many of these woodland species is accomplished, and they have these mottled vermiculate patterns like this bird. But a formidable predator, and again, a bit of controversy. We have eagle owls in the UK now, and they're breeding in the wild because they've escaped from captivity. And the controversy stems from the fact that some people believe that these birds never occurred here because they don't like flying over water. They occur all the way through Germany, Holland, France, just across the Channel and the North Sea. But because they don't like flying over water, the thought in some camps is that they never got blown across by accident, and therefore they never occurred here, and we don't want them in the UK because, as I've already mentioned, they can exact a terrible predation pressure on many native species, but they do that on the continent as well, where they've always existed. So there are some people who think that we should kill all the eagle owls that we've got in this country because they're basically like an introduced species, and there are other people who say, well, they were probably here, we just didn't bump into them. There's no archaeological evidence to suggest that they were here as well. So at the moment, the jury's out, nothing's happening, owls carrying on, but they don't seem to be increasing in number too rapidly. But yeah, remarkable, strong and powerful birds. And you definitely want the glove on with these because look at these talons here. We're looking at 4 or 5 centimetres of very, very sharp talon and also an enormous crushing power in the feet because that's the killing organ. Shall we give it a go? What do you think, the vulture?
Yeah, we'll have a go, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, although it's not an owl and it's not a bat, we just thought we might finish off by flying a larger bird. And the reason that I'm keen to get it out is that it's not a bird we see in captivity very often, and Derek happens to have one. In fact, it's the only one I've ever seen outside the wild. And it's a thing called a palm nut vulture. And it's one of only 3 known species of raptor vulture owl in the world that eats vegetable material. And the name has given it away. It eats palm nuts. So we have black kites, they will eat it, and harrier hawks, they will eat vegetable material. But palm nut vultures are the only others. And they are an animal that you find over West Africa. They're normally associated with water because that's where oil palm grows. And they are very easy to spot. They're large black and white birds. They will also, I have to say, they will also eat dead fish, and occasionally they may even kill small mammals. But the principal food of these birds is palm nuts. A highly unusual bird. In terms of their history, their taxonomy, I wish I could tell you. Debate ranges. Although we've got extraordinary techniques these days of analysing DNA to look at the heritage of animals and how they're related to one another, when it comes to some of these groups, particularly things like the owls is another group, and which we think are possibly related to nightjars, which I know sounds ridiculous, but the genetics are saying that in some ways, but the jury's out. And when it comes to the vultures, some camps think that they are closely associated, as you might imagine, with eagles and hawks. Others think that they're associated with storks and those sorts of birds, and that they basically have evolved to do a relatively similar job. Okay, Derek, what's the plan?
Try and get the swivel off.
Okay.
Yeah, the plan is, what we'll do, again, I'll go over there. He was asleep, so will the lights go up a bit higher?
Lights a bit higher.
Lights a bit higher.
I wonder if we have the lights up a little bit. Vulture's not an owl, it needs to see in daylight. Okay. Oh, it's looking at that pretty keenly, Derek.
He's what, sorry?
It's looking at my fingers or your fingers quite keenly. Yeah.
Yeah, he's all right now.
He's good.
He's okay.
Okay.
I mean, what we'll do, I'll go over there and I'll fly him to you.
Okay.
And much like the bar now.
Okay. And then I'll come down and we'll see if we can get him to predate some of the audience. Oh, no, not predate the audience, no. There's no palm nuts in the audience, no. Right, here we go. What's his name, Derek? I forget.
Manfred. Manfred Mann, you know.
I vaguely, and I mean, I was only about 2, but
yeah, I'm showing my age. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, let's have a go.
Manfred,
over there.
Come on, Manfred. Look up.
I've got to make the excuses. The lights a bit.
Come on.
Over there. Look. You seen it? You seen it? I'm going to do it on stage, and then we're going to progress.
Let's do a short jump. Manfred. Yeah, Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Was that right? Yeah, thought so. Can't remember any tracks, but anyway, there we are. Do a short one.
As soon as he sees it.
Then he knows that I've got food.
He was asleep, but there we go.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right, go on. No, don't jump down and have that pot.
Manfred? No, be like that.
Manfred?
Over here. This is what you get for waking him up. That's a good lad.
Good, right. So we're going to plan.
You don't want that bit.
Okay, Manfred, come on. Come on, Manfred.
Over there, look.
Come on. Come on.
Come on.
Come on, Manfred.
That's this time.
Manfred.
Good boy.
Right. Smells great, Derek. I love the smell of a palm nut vulture. Yeah.
That's just
God, it does smell good. It smells really good. No, that's my glasses and my owl pellets.
Are you coming over here then, Manfred? He hasn't been fed for 3 days. You thought he would have. No, I'm joking.
You know what I said about owls not being very wise?
Manfred.
Come on, Alfred. Come on, Manfred. Come on. There we are. Come on. Come on.
You wanted it earlier, didn't you, the food? Oh. I don't think we're going to get much more out of him. So.
You don't think so? No.
There we go. Good lad.
Let's give him one more go, Derek.
You're going to have one more, yeah?
I'm going to have one more go, yeah. Got to. It's just a matter of principle and honour. Right, okay, Manfred. Look, there's a huge mass of stuff here. Don't look at that. Look at this. Right, Manfred, Seriously, without a word. Come on.
Right there.
Manfred, you know that old adage that we want to finish on a high?
Yeah, and I want to come back again next year. There
Come
you
on.
go. Yeah. Manfred, are you ready?
Manfred, come on. So good last year, Derek, honestly.
There we go. Yeah,
Come
he
on.
did. He was.
Come on.
I don't think it'll make any difference, but if you turn round,
Yeah?
I don't think it'll make any difference, but you
Okay,
just
let's
never
try it.
know.
Come on, Manfred.
Now,
Come
this
on.
time, make me look as if I know what I'm doing.
Come
Manfred,
on.
come on, off you go.
Manfred.
That's it. No.
One more go. I'm not sure he deserves it. But let's have a round of applause for Manfred. And I'm not sure he deserves it, but let's have a round of applause for David Tyndall. Thanks, David. Thanks, David.
No
look,
problem.
eat it now.
Yeah,
A bit late.
typical.
Yeah, here we are. Thank you. That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And David, if people want to see more of the birds, how do they get to see them?
Yeah, go on my website. The dates haven't come out yet, but yeah, you'll see me all around Lincolnshire and beyond that as well.
Okay, catching up with Manfred, and he'll be in action.
Yeah, yes, no problem. I mean, he's you won't believe it, but he's a very good display bird in the day.
We don't offer excuses, but we can give you a proper one. At winter time, you give them more food,
Yes,
they put
I
on
do.
weight. It's not
Yeah.
the flying season. It's like asking, Sterling Moss to come out of retirement and win the next Grand Prix, to be quite honest with you. So there is a genuine excuse, perhaps, why Manfred wasn't performing. But do try and catch David and the birds at some stage next year. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, due to our ambitions and aspirations with Manfred, we haven't got much time left for questions. But if you've got any questions, I'll do my best to answer a couple before we wrap up. Has anyone got any there? Okay. Are bats solitary? No. The vast majority are social animals, and certainly the ones that we see in the UK are social. Hold on, I'm losing my sound. James mentioned that those pipistrelles are found in different numbers. In some bat groups, as I mentioned, those American free-tailed bats, you get into the millions. And even within Europe, we see bat roosts where there are tens of thousands of animals that come together. And they're not only sociable in the roosting sense, but also in the communication sense. They're constantly communicating. And one of the most extraordinary things you can see, if you're a truly dedicated naturalist, is in the summer, if you have a roost of pipistrelles, and you're fortunate to have them in your house, you need to get up at about 3 in the morning and go out and sit beneath the roost, because they will perform on certain mornings a thing called a dawn swarm. And typically in the evening, when the bats leave the roost, they do it in dribs and drabs. So you don't get a great funnel coming out like you do with some of the tropical species. But when they come back in the morning, they will fly close to the roost and they will whirl in an increasingly tight ball of bats, which is quite spectacular, even at 3 in the morning, bleary-eyed. And then they will all go back into their roost. And the reason that they're doing this is undoubtedly a form of social behaviour where they're communicating to one another. So the British species are all, well, they're all highly social, apart from our rarest bat. And the rarest bat we have in the UK is a thing called the greater mouse-eared bat. And we only have one of them. And this poor, lonely male bat has been living in a tunnel in Sussex for years. It disappears in the winter, probably goes back to the continent, but then every summer it comes back and it lives on its own in the tunnel, and it's the loneliest bat in Britain. Yep, it's been on Binder, which is a bat version of Tinder. But frankly, as soon as its face appears, it just gets swiped, and that's it. So it's the loneliest bat in Britain, but ideally in other parts of Europe, mouse-eared bats roost in thousands. Okay, Another over there. Oh, sorry, the little owl here. This is a Scops owl. And this is one of those birds that I mentioned that I picked up dead in Africa. So we get them in southern Europe, and they have a very monotonous call, which is sometimes, if you're in the Mediterranean, you'll think it's an electronic device that's going off. But in fact, it's the Scops owl, white-faced Scops owl. So, and again, there are a group of owls that are very common, small, a bit like the little owl, insectivorous. We'll take small mammals and lizards, that sort of thing. Pretty much strictly nocturnal, and in some places can be really common. And you'll notice this one's got fabulous whiskers here. And that's because of one thing I didn't tell you about the owl's eyesight is that they're very far-sighted, and they can't see things that are close to their face. So when it comes to manipulating their food, they have basically these sort of vibrissae, like whiskers that come out, bristles that come out around their face, and they use those just as a cat does to feel the food, because it can't focus on it. They can't focus within about 4 centimetres, most owls. So they have those very whiskery faces, particularly those little Scops owls. And as I say, very common across Africa and Europe too, southern Europe. Okay, there's a young man right at the back. You're going to have to shout out really loudly. How can you, it's the best question of the night, how can we help save the bats and the owls? Well, the first thing you can do is to join the local bat group, and I'm sure that you'd be most welcome, because we like young people because they've got lots of energy, and they get up really early, and they work really hard, and they learn things really quickly, and so we want more and more young people to come on board, and you could certainly help with their surveys. So that would be the first thing. Secondly, maybe you know someone who could put up a barn owl box so you could help directly. And other than that, I think what you've got to do, what we've all got to do, is to realise that even as individuals, we can make a difference when it comes to campaigning to make our world a better place for wildlife. We need to stand up and be counted. It's enough in the past, for people to care. Caring, that was good. But now we need to actually take some action. So you should go online, and you should sign petitions, and you should write to your MP, even though you're not of voting age, doesn't matter. They listen to young people, because when they make them cry, they don't like it very much. So you should write to your MP, and you should use the power of the pen and the keyboard to exercise your voice. And if you want the world to be a better place for wildlife, then you need to do it, and I need to do it. If I do it, it's me. If you do it, it's we. If we all do it here, it's a lot of we. And when you've got a lot of we, you've got a full bladder, and you absolutely have to take some action immediately. And on that note, and on the notion of a full bladder, I think it's time to say goodnight. I've gone over by 3 minutes. Can I thank you all for coming along this evening? It's been a real pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed seeing the owls and the bats. Massive thanks to James and Julie, and of course to Derek as well. Do catch up with them and think about joining the bat group. Thank you very much indeed.